Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for this event with Kehinde and Imarn Ayton. And they are here tonight to discuss Kehinde's latest book, The New Age of Empire, How Racism and Colonialism Still Rule the World. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to say that Housmans is open for business again. For those of you who don't know Housmans, we are one of the UK's oldest and last remaining radical bookshops in the UK. We're based in the King's Cross area of London. We're just a minute round the corner from the station, and we have a huge range of radical material and literature. So please drop by if you're in the King's Cross area. And we will be running plenty more online events, free online events. So follow us on social media, or please check the events page on our website. But let me introduce our guests tonight. We have author and educator Kehinde Andrews, who is Associate Professor in Sociology at Birmingham City University and editor of the series Blackness in Britain. He was part of the team that launched the first Black Studies degree in Europe, and he is also co-chair of the Black Studies Association and of the Harambee Organisation of Black Unity. And his conversation partner tonight is Imarn Ayton, who is an anti-racism activist and founder of the Black Reformist movement. Imarn has become a motivational speaker and racism thought leader and advocates for tackling institutional racism in the UK. Before I hand over to our speakers, just some very brief housekeeping guidelines. You can participate in the conversation with Kehinde and Imarn by writing your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Kehinde and Imarn will be answering the audience's questions tonight. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves and comment in the discussion in the chat box, but remember, if you write a question for the speakers in the chat box, they might miss it, because that tends to go up a little bit like a Twitter feed. So questions and comments in the Q&A box. I'm now going to hand over to our speakers, and I hope you all enjoyed tonight's discussion. So over to Kehinde and Imarn. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what a pleasure. Finally, I get to speak to you. I'm very excited to be able to actually have a conversation with you.
Happy to be here as well.
Yeah, it's been a while. What's weird for me is because I've been hearing your name obviously quite kind of over and over and over again during the Black Lives Matter movement. Yeah. So for me, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak to you today. So yes.
No, pleasure's mine. Pleasure's mine completely.
Good. Yes, and of course I read your book and I am a fan. I thought your book was so insightful, and it was kind of a piece to the puzzle, a massive piece to the puzzle in regards to kind of this information that is just almost feels as if it's lost to us because we're just not taught it. So to be able to read it was just so insightful. I was able to kind of put everything together, kind of put it into kind of a bigger picture. So first question, what inspired you to write the book?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, no, really what inspired me was I wrote Back to Black, Retelling Black Radicalism from the 21st century, which was 2018. And, you know, that's, this book's a bit, I don't know if it's a bit negative, right? Like, it's a bit like, this is the problem, it diagnoses the issues, look, everything's terrible. But Back to Black's the more, this is what we can do. But what was very clear, I talked to lots of people about that book, and what was really clear was that people needed to understand the scale of the problem. And that was a missing piece because we just, I kind of grew up, all these books behind me, that's like, my family was Black Power, British Black Power. I just kind of grew up knowing this stuff, but most people don't, right? Like, it's not taught, you don't really have the access to info. And so it's really clear there was a missing piece. And so that's why I went and said, well, actually, let me just write it down in detail. Let's just go back and like just really try and make it clear. And sometimes, like in academia, some of these ideas are floating around, but the way that we write things, it's impenetrable and no one can read it and it's just not accessible. And so it was like, let's try and write this out in a way which is accessible, people can understand it, people can engage with it. And then we can have that conversation about what happens next.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so, all right. So having listened to that, what is the key thing that you want the readers to take away from reading this book? What is the number one thing that you need a person, whoever is reading this book, to be like, right, I get it, understand it, I'm there now, Kehinde, you are the man. What is that key thing?
I'd say it's a Malcolm X quote. It's all right, because it's going to be a lot of Malcolm X. Generally, there's a lot of Malcolm X with me, but I have also just finished listening to a 17-hour audiobook speeches of Malcolm X, so there's like a lot of Malcolm X at the minute. It's not that great a book, but that's another whole nother story. But the Malcolm X quote, actually, the 17 hours of Malcolm X, and this quote wasn't in the book. Where I'm like,
this is the one. All right, it better be good. It better be.
Well, the quote. I built it up now, innit? Like, I know what's the point. Build it up.
Right, let's hear it. The quote is,
and if you have heard me talk before, you will know this quote because I say it all the time. But Malcolm says, look, this system can no more provide freedom, justice, and equality for Black people than a chicken can lay a duck egg, right? It's just not meant to do it. Right? And if you actually look at what this principal founding logic of the West of Britain, of all this, it's white supremacy. I mean, that's what makes the whole thing tick. White supremacy is the system. And so once we understand that, then we understand that we need to do something else, right? That's the takeaway.
Okay, right. So we're going to start from basics. Okay, so just for anyone that's watching, my name's Imarn Ayton. I organised several BLM protests last year. As we know, we all chanted Black Lives Matter. I am a reformist. I don't actually necessarily go down the kind of route of following abolition. But yet I was an organizer of several protests. So for me, it's extremely important to be able to speak to someone like Kehinde, who has truly amazing ideologies and has been quite vocal about it. And I just want to see where our kind of ideologies meet, basically. So first, we're going to start at basics. Last year, all you heard was white supremacy, white supremacy. And for anyone in the 21st century looking at England, they're thinking, hold on, you know, I'm not talking about me as a Black woman, I'm talking about friends, I'm talking about the people that I've spoken to, I'm sure the people that you've spoken to. Yeah. They're thinking, hold on, Kehinde, okay? Hold on, Kehinde and Imarn, who's talking about white supremacy. What's all of this? What's happening here? So the question to you is, what is white supremacy in your definition?
What is white supremacy? Yes. Very simply, white supremacy is the logic that white life is more valuable, more precious, it means more than other lives, right? I mean, simply that, right? Now, the practice of that, you can see everywhere, right? So when we look at, when we look at racial disparities, as they call them now, I mean, I don't know when we started calling them disparities, but anyway, when we look at,
take on these words as if we've known them for ages. I know.
Yeah. But when you look at racial inequality, you can see that everywhere. When you look at global, I mean, the simplest way I always explain this is look at global inequality, and look at. So in the book, I have a whole chapter on the Enlightenment. Right, I'm white, therefore I am, and all these theories had very clear white supremacy theory, which is white people are better, everybody else just isn't really very good, and then Black people are at the bottom. So Black people at the bottom, white people at the top, and there's kind of a ladder in between. And if you look at a map of global inequality, what will you find? Sub-Saharan Africa is the poorest of Black people. The white places, the West is the richest, and then you have this kind of ladder in between. That's white supremacy. It is literally in the economy, and the basic premise that Black and brown life is disposable and can be used to benefit what happens over here. That's it. Simple as that. Simple.
So for me as a Black person in Southeast London, born and bred, half Nigerian, half Jamaican.
Yeah.
I always knew everything that you were saying, just didn't know why. Okay, so you know when you grow up and you know these things, but you can't articulate as to why, as to how, or how you feel this way. Obviously, you know that your ancestors and your family, your granny and your mum have spoken to you about racism and etc. You know that part, but you know instinctively that there is something happening beyond you and your little area, and beyond London and beyond England. There is something more insidious happening, but no one is actually telling us what it is. And I remember kind of having that dark cloud follow me as I kind of grew up, that not knowing. And then I remember reading your book, and in chapter 2, Genocide, you said a comment, and it was about the fact, I have it written down actually, let me just read it. The Holocaust represents colonial practices coming into play in Europe. Africans and Asians and indigenous people being slaughtered by Europeans did not trouble the psyche of the West. But seeing colonial violence enacted on the same types of people, it's created a complete rethinking of long-held paradigms of race and power. I have more. The fact that the term genocide, right? So let me just make sure everyone's listening. The fact that the term genocide only came into existence in the West during the Holocaust is testament enough to the problem. So let's just, again, put everything into context. We're talking about white supremacy, this thing that we feel, don't really know where it is, what's happening, but we know it's there, we know what's happening, we kind of sense it, right? Whether you're black, white, pink, purple, you kind of get this vibe, whether you want to say it or not, consciously, subconsciously, whatever. And it was this statement that really kind of resonated with me, because what you're ultimately saying, which is ultimately the contentious statement, what you're saying in chapter 2, genocide, okay, the term genocide, is that that term actually didn't exist when black and brown people were being enslaved and raped and murdered across the world. That term did not exist. It only came into existence when the Holocaust happened, right? So that term only came, there was only a term given for brutally murdering people. Let's forget the hundreds of years of black people being murdered and slaughtered. We don't have a name for that. That's just slavery. No. But Jews, we're gonna help them. We're gonna make sure that we do several things. We're gonna actually make sure that we give it a name, so the whole world knows what it looks like when you brutally murder people. Tell me about that. I found that. I didn't know that. That was a beautiful fact for me. You know, when you're thinking about the things that you can hold for your arguments, you know, I was like, that's gold. So tell me about that.
I mean, to be fair, it's something I hadn't really, until I was writing all the stuff and reading through everything, I hadn't really clocked just how deep that is, right? That even now, like when we're discussing, so the largest genocide in human history is the natives in the Americas, which is by a distance, like the estimate is about 70 million people were wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, in Haiti and Dominican Republic, where Christopher Columbus, the hero, but also the devil of the West.
Can I just cut you and just say, I love the sentence. Let's start with 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And I remember thinking, had someone said that to me back in school, I probably would have remembered that. I will always remember 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
I know, because we did that.
So, you know, didn't know that information before. Couldn't tell you when Columbus sailed the ocetion blue. But I got it now. We had that in our school. Like we actually had that. Like in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That was something we grew up with in school. There's another writer, I stole this from somebody else in the book. They call that whole story "Once Upon a Genocide" because there's this tale of Columbus being this hero. Columbus was one of the worst people in the history of humanity. Columbus was awful, man-eating dogs, slavery, Europe's real first slave trader. When Columbus goes to Hispaniola, what they call Hispaniola, in 1492, they estimated that there's 8 million people living on the island. By the time he leaves in 1512,
the estimate is 20,000 people are left. I mean, just imagine that. I mean, that is unheard of, right? But even now, conceptually, they didn't think of that as a problem. And even now, there's debates about whether that was a genocide because, well, most of it was disease. Did Europeans really mean to do it? So even now, there's not even consensus that that was a genocide. Even now, you heard David Starkey say slavery wasn't a genocide because there wouldn't be so many damn blacks, right? Even now, people don't think slavery is a genocide because they didn't try to kill all of us. And if you actually look at this term genocide, it really is, it only comes into being in the Holocaust because this is the first time where those people we consider to be white and within Europe, the same logic that's been applied for centuries in Africa, in the Americas, in India, and now gets applied to people we think of as white, and it becomes this big thing. Oh my God, look at this! We have to have a new term for it, and even race. So racial science, the idea that me and you aren't really human beings, you can measure our heads and all that stuff, that was perfectly accepted until what happened? This was applied to white people, what we consider white, Jewish people, and then it's like, no, we can't do that. We've got to get rid of it. So without the Holocaust, we'd still be talking about racial science. Like we still wouldn't have a term for genocide. It's really, when you really deep just how that should show you how bad white supremacy is. That conceptually, it took this violence being enacted on white bodies for it to even register as an issue. And that's not to downplay the Holocaust. The Holocaust is awful. The Holocaust is one of the worst things in history. But put in its broader context, the Holocaust is actually just a part of a much wider racial annihilation project that Europe and the West was involved in for centuries.
Right, and that's what I found particularly interesting because even for me growing up, in history, I've been taught that one of the in terms of the biggest focus, I would say the biggest focus for me growing up in terms of history, in terms of kind of mass slaughter, was always the Holocaust. And they gave kind of slavery that kind of month in October, or if there were predominantly black people, then maybe the school would say, right, you know, Miss Clayton or whoever it was, please teach Black history. But ultimately, I remember growing up with more of a focus on the Holocaust, as that was the pinnacle. That was the pinnacle of what it looked like in terms of brutality. And obviously, as a Black person, I know otherwise, and in terms of my history. But I found it fascinating to see it in your book, to actually have someone articulate the things that I was thinking at 10, when I was thinking, why am I being told about the Holocaust, but yet there's not much emphasis on slavery? And for me, as a Black person, in my humble opinion, what, 400 years or 200 years of slavery and 200 years of colonialism, that's a big deal. And I think that should hold just as much weight as the Holocaust. But yet, for me, it was just
and the other thing is,
I couldn't understand why.
Well, yeah, but but the other thing about that is because the way that we teach the Holocaust, we don't understand the Holocaust at all, right? So there's one of the things that gets me so mad is when we talk about, there's a book by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste, where she talks about Nazi Germany and hasn't Germany done well? And this great book about this book called Learning from the Germans, where because the Holocaust happened and the Germans have given reparations and really sorry about it, and in Holocaust and was a crime. It's like Germany's overcome its problem with racism. I mean, that is utterly ridiculous because we've divorced the Holocaust from colonialism. Holocaust doesn't happen without colonialism, without slavery, it's the Germans in Tanzania, what they call Southwest Africa. That's where they get the ideas of racial science that are then enacted in the Holocaust. So Germany still has hundreds of thousands of schools of Tanzanians and Namibians, which they took from people in the early 20th century and used to create this racial science, which Jewish people then get round up in. So we haven't actually understood the Holocaust properly. The Holocaust cannot be separated from all of it which happens previously. The only real difference is...
But I find it is.
It is completely, conceptually.
Yeah,
totally.
it is. I've always seen it.
Conceptually, it's like...
separate things.
Which is
because I don't know if anyone younger, I'm 29, but I'm telling you, when I was in school, they were very much slavery from 100, almost a million, quadrillion years ago to then Holocaust, right? That was how it felt. That was a long time ago.
That's still how it is. the reason for that is because if you were to tell the story of the Holocaust properly, what creates the Holocaust, and it is racial science, it is colonialism, it is the links back to slavery, it is all those things, right? Well, then you'd have to tell the story about actually, this is very British in its origin. So the idea of eugenics, people like Francis Galton, Carl Pearson, who were still celebrated, right? We still use the whole statistics as a discipline comes out of this idea of racial science. And the Nazi scientists, some of the actual Nazi scientists, Eugene Fischer, for example, who was massively important in the Holocaust, worked closely with who else? Carl Pearson, with Galton. And these ideas of racial hygiene, these ideas of Jews being inferior, those aren't Nazi ideas. Those are Western ideas, which the Nazis take to an extreme and enact, and it's like, oh, it's terrible. But if you told the story of the Holocaust properly, you'd understand that Britain is not this great shining beacon hero. Britain is actually largely at fault for the ideas that led to the Holocaust in the first place. There's a great book on this by Zygmunt Bauman, whose family is Jewish, right? So don't take it from me, right? He says, look, actually, Western modernity is the only house that could have produced the Holocaust because of its ideas of race, because of its ideas of violence and brutality, because of its ideas of science. And we teach the Holocaust like it's this great aberration, that it's just these evil people. No, the Holocaust makes perfect sense given everything else that had gone before. And it really couldn't have been produced in any other environment.
Okay, so then when you're taking that in, and I'm like, I see that 100%, and I'm annoyed that it's not been clearer previously. It's only now it's clear, but spent so long it not making any sense. Okay, so then what I would say to that is, to what extent is education or miseducation a part of contributing to white supremacy and racism? So I'm just going to say that again so everyone's listening, okay? To what extent does the education system or non-education, lack of education, miseducation affect the contribution to white supremacy and racism in the UK? How does it affect it all? Help us figure this out.
Well, I just call it schooling. This is what I typically call it, schooling. Like schooling, the things you're taught to learn in school society more generally. The whole purpose. This is probably the main thing that maintains white supremacy, because if you teach a lie, right? If you just teach a story differently, the version of everything that we're given, Britain's wonderful. Britain is a country that abolished the slave trade. Imagine that. That's how we learn it, right? Britain is a country that abolished the slave trade. Not the premier slave trade in the whole entire system. No.
That part's ignored. It's like you miss that on Tuesday. You come in for Wednesday. Wednesday's the important day, because Wednesday's going to tell you about the day when we started to abolish slavery. Tuesday was when we were monsters and started killing and raping around the world. You don't want to be in for Tuesday. That's literally how I felt growing up. It's like, did I miss a day? Did I miss something?
Did I miss something? Yeah. I mean, it's insane, right? But so you have to teach that, and you have to teach that and make it and teach it so well that people generally believe it, and most people still generally believe it, I think. And so without these ideas are important, because those are the things which maintain what we have today. The society, this is a quote in the book, the society can only be as equal as the knowledge it's built upon. And we're just told lots of lies, which make us think that everything's fine, but it's not. And the other thing about that is, were we to truly understand the development and the history of what we have now, then we'd understand it hasn't really changed that much either. Like, actually, that same logic is still there. Black and brown life is still disposable. That's why in the 21st century we're saying Black Lives Matter. It's the 21st century. But we still have to say it because it clearly doesn't, right?
So this is where I forgot to mention, and this is perfect time to mention it. The thing that truly resonated with me. So obviously, the history is what is the thing that kind of allows me to kind of put everything together, kind of understand everything, right? But the thing that truly resonated with me in terms of reading the book, I felt like it contributed to my argument. And I'm, like I said, I'm a reformist. So I believe in society understanding all forms of racism, because I always say that racism is kind of just put into this kind of homogeneous box and people don't break it down. If you don't break it down, you don't really know what's happening. And so what I say is that there is three types of racism, just like there is with sexism, right? You got sexism, individual, societal, and institutional. It's the same with racism. It's covert, overt, covert, and institutionalized. They're different forms, right? So what I found is that as a society, everyone talks about racism, but the litmus test, our frame of reference, like in terms of what we think of how people are, if they are a racist, or if, you know, that kind of, that person's a racist because they've done that. We have a certain type of frame of reference. And that frame of reference, I find, is to do with overt and nothing less. So the average person in England thinks racism is, oh, I'm walking around going and calling people the N-word, or I'm going out and being obvious, deliberate, and direct with my discriminatory behaviours. When that actually isn't the case anymore in the UK. Overt racism is what we see in the US, hence why you had thousands of people, including myself, obviously leading marches, talking about Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, because what we witnessed was overt racism. That's our litmus test in the UK, right? We know, oh my God, that person has to be racist because it's overt and obvious. Yeah. But I've always said laws, as we know, they help things. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they do. And the law changed, and what happened is it made harsher penalties for people that exhibited overt forms of racism. So therefore, overt forms of racism decreased within society. This is why you get a lot of people saying, oh, there's no racism. We're not killing people like George Floyd. What are you on about? And it's because overt racism has decreased. However, we transitioned from overt racism to covert racism, much more subtle, much more discreet. And the reason why your book resonated with me is because I felt like this was the first time that I heard that argument, but on a global scale, right? Because what you're talking about is ultimately what I took from the book is England or the world or US or whatever, we all together transition from overt racism to covert racism. And with covert racism, there's all these different dynamics because it protects itself, it finds its way into the people that are a part of it. So it's harder to break down, it's harder to annihilate, it's harder to kind of penetrate if it's so subtle and insidious. So is it progress? I don't know. I like the comment that you said, right? You had a wicked comment. That was it. I'm going to try to remember. It's something along the lines of, was it the stealing? It was like, I've stolen your money and then I'm going to, so I steal your money, Kehinde, okay? I'm going to steal your money, right? I've stolen it. It's in my pocket. Right, you go and buy yourself, you want to go to McDonald's, you want to buy yourself a burger. And then you realize you have no money. There's no money for Kehinde to buy a burger at McDonald's. And then Imarn walks along and she says, hey, Kehinde, would you like a loan? You know what? I like you. I care about you. I'm going to give you I'm going to give you a loan. I'm going to give you this £1.29 to get your burger. But when you get your burger, I want half. I want half because I'm looking after you, right? That's the new dynamic we have. And that is how I felt your book summed up for me, overt to covert on a global level. And that's why I want to talk about UN, IMF and the World Bank, just that transition from we're going to be overt about how we deal with Black people and Indigenous people and etc., Black and brown people, to now we're going to be covert about it. So without me going, staying on that beautiful tangent, getting back to the point of the book, tell us about, now that I've talked about that transition, so we know about the annihilation of the 72 million in the Americas from 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean. You know about that. You know about slavery. And I think it's safe to say everyone knows about slavery. It's got to the point where it's become normalized. Desensitized almost, because we do very much hold on to slavery, but not colonialism and imperialism. So that's something separate. So, in fact, I've got two questions. After slavery and after colonialism, can I just ask really quickly before I delve into IMF and
Mhm.
what was the state of the countries financially that were affected by the transatlantic slave trade? What did the countries look like financially before UN, before all of
Well, you mean
the
like African countries and
transition, right? What did those countries where Black and brown people were living like? What did it look like?
before the UN? So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean this is the key part of that, right? Is at that point when you get to like Second World War before the UN, at that point the damage is kind of done, right? You've already stolen all the money. Like it's all gone.
Don't make me laugh. You shouldn't laugh. It's very serious. But
No, it's
that
true,
analogy is beautiful. That
Like,
analogy.
it's true. And you missed that part. You missed that part of the analogy. Not only do you have to give half the burger, I would then owe you £3 for the £1.29. I have to pay you more money.
Oh my God. I hope I didn't spit on camera. I hope no one saw.
But that's how deep this is, right? Like, that's the madness. That's the whole thing.
So wait, you owe me more money now.
Yes, I owe you more money than I borrowed.
Your stuff and you owe me more money. That is the global dynamic of
that's how it works.
what happened after the transatlantic slave trade. So after the transatlantic slave trade, all of these countries had no money. They were basically, all of their money was stolen, right? Their money was stolen. And the next thing you know, someone comes along and says, hey, here you go. I'm going to give you a loan. So that's why I want to say, tell me about what it looked like in terms of financially, and then tell me about UN and IMF. I mean,
let's just take Nigeria. See, families from Nigeria, right? Nigeria is a perfect example, right? So prior to, and this is the thing I wanted to stress in the book, prior to 1492, Europe was behind. Europe is behind everywhere. Europe is in the only part of the world probably in a dark age. When Europeans go to Africa, I mean, the Moors had just the Moors had just come into Spain and were like bringing civilization into Spain. Like Europe was definitely behind everywhere at this point.
Right. So then this is technically the beginning of this white supremacy, which is technically entangled with hierarchy and / that kind of human part, which is I want the best life possible. Right. So it's that I want the best life possible. That comes with a hierarchy. And how do I keep that and maintain the best life possible? I find
how do I get
I find an explanation, and my explanation as this white male in this country, Black brown people, is I am higher and
I am boss.
Superior. Thank you. So therefore that is the birth, right? So what we're talking about right now is that kind of birth moment where the rest of the world was actually doing okay. We were good.
Yeah, we were fine. Like, we were right. It was all right. We could have carried on. It would have been okay.
It was good. Okay. So this is what I'm getting from your book, because I didn't realize these things because no one taught me this in my school. So I was very grateful for your book.
Yeah, no, we had science.
Right, but you see what I'm trying to say, right? No one, they don't teach you it, obviously, and we know why, but I didn't know these things. I remember the start of Black existence starting with slavery. That was it. There wasn't anything.
I mean, even that's like, I mean, even like, let's take Nigeria. So Nigeria at this point is fine, right? It's doing okay, developing, etc. There's an Arab slave trade through Africa, certainly at this point. So, and again, this is the thing. A lot of things in Europe aren't really Europeans' ideas. They kind of take them from other people and then take them a bit further, which is essentially what they do with the Arab slave trade. But Africa's doing fine, right? When Europe wants to, at this point, Europe has to trade with Africans. They can't take over Africa. They know that they're not powerful enough. They don't have the resources. They're not rich enough.
So there's no white supremacy at this point.
No, I mean, in their minds, probably there is white supremacy.
It hasn't been expressed.
In reality,
it hasn't been expressed into the world.
But they start. But you can see very early on they start. So one of the first things that happens after the Moors are defeated by the Spanish, it starts really early. So there's a big, I can't remember the guy's name, it's in the book, but there's one of the things they do, very first thing they do about knowledge, again, is really important. And there's more libraries in Africa than there are, there's almost more libraries in Africa than there are books in Europe at this point. I mean, the knowledge gap is immense in terms of libraries, books, etc., etc. And one of the first acts they do tells you just how deep this is. They go in and they burn this massive library in I'm tired. I'm forgetting where it is. I think it's in
No, you said it in the book. You said it in the book. They burnt books. That was what they
like
did.
2 million books. There's a public burning in the square in Grenada. I think it's Grenada in Spain. And there's public book burning. They burn the books. But before they burn the books, right? Because they're Arab books, they translate the books into Latin, change the names of everybody in the books to Latin names, and then basically pretend that they're Europeans, right? So and then have just literally whitewashed the intellectual heritage and history. I mean, and that just tells you how deep this is, right? So white supremacy is there, but then they have to build the rest of the project. And so this is why the Americas are so important, because it really is in the Americas that Europe finds the wealth. Finds first it's gold and it's silver, and they find massive amounts of wealth. Portugal and Spain are kind of the leaders, and they bring that into Europe, and everybody's benefiting from the gold and the silver, and they're using that to trade into India. So one of the things I learned in the book that I didn't know previously was the Taj Mahal is gold mined from the enslaved in Brazil, right? They had that. Europe couldn't take over India. They had to go in there with gold and silver. Like China was the one. Cordoba. Somebody put it in the somebody put it in the chat. Cordoba was the place that did this massive book in Spain. And the first people who were buying all this silver was actually China. Was buying the silver from the enslaved. India was buying the gold, right? And so this enriches Europe, and they start to develop and start to get more. And then they really hit this slavery is a thing that turns everything. Because when you turn us into commodities, and you have things like cotton and sugar. But even at this point, Europe can't take Africa. Europeans want to have slave plantations in Africa, and Africans say, no, that's not going to happen, right? There's fierce resistance. Fierce resistance. That's why you've got those castles, the slave ports like Elmina. Eventually, they can't even keep the slave castles. But even then, they can't keep the slave castles.
I just have to emphasize to anyone that's listening in terms of education and why you heard a load of Black people talking about decolonizing the education system. It's not actually overt, it's covert. It's as simple as just missing out facts. It's almost like an omission of truth. If you don't say certain things, you're not technically lying, are you? Right? You're not technically lying. You're just not telling the whole truth. And that's literally the education system. So it's actually not overt. Again, it's covert. So please continue.
No, it's true.
Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, it's true. But this so at this point, so even the castles can't be kept because they're still being attacked. So at some point, Europeans actually dock the boats off the sea, and then have to fill up the boats with Africans. So you got this stalemate where Europe's strong enough that the slave trade can carry on, but they cannot conquer it. They cannot conquer anywhere in Africa. They can't. In fact, colonialism in most parts of Africa is less than 100 years. It's not that long. We kind of think it's long, but it's really not that long because there was this stalemate. And what that does, though, the slave trade, because it totally and utterly destabilizes Africa in terms of people. Imagine the lowest estimate is there's 12 million arrive, probably another 10 million die on the way, probably another 10 to 50 million die on trek. So this is the other thing that gets missed through rebellions, through the trek from the interior to the coast. About 40% of people died on the trek from the interior to the coast. The amount of life that lost is insane. We're probably talking about 40 million people minimum, and it's probably higher than that, who were taken out of the continent. And I remember doing Industrial Revolution at school, and they always said population explosion was one of the main reasons for development. Because when you got people, this leads to development. Imagine you take out 40 million people from a continent. Imagine what impact that's going to have, and not just any people, working age people, right, young people. So it drains people, and also the whole economy changes. So one of the things I really wanted to do this in the book because I think it's important is slavery couldn't have happened without African collusion. This couldn't happen. It literally couldn't. There's no doubt about it. It couldn't have happened. But collusion in this context is complicated, really, really complicated, right? So what happens is people start to protect themselves, right? So you have, I'm going to protect my people, so I'm going to sell those people because if I sell those people, I'm not going to get caught, right? That's what collusion is, right?
Best quality of life, and that's what I brought it down to. And I don't know what the term is, but I just put it back to a spiritual place, which is the first thing that a human being wants is just the best quality of life. And that's an innocent, normal thing that every single human being on this planet wants. And some people will do that by any means necessary, right? Yeah. Right? That some people will, some people won't, but some people will. And I think what we're hearing in history is people that said, I want the best quality of life, or I want my country to have the best quality of life by any means necessary. And that's what we're kind of starting to see. Right? Survival. So I get what you're saying about the collusion thing. Yeah, I get that.
But what happens then is also because the slave trade becomes this massive thing, it really changes. So you actually see the empires that were kind of more happy to collude, is that the right way to put it, rise up, right? So there's like the Walla, for example, kind of rise. But it really changes the whole political economy of the continent. People move away from the coast. People are not cultivating land, not developing. Basically, defending yourselves from slavery or selling people into slavery becomes kind of the key thing on the continent for a good couple hundred years, which massively just devastates the continent. Imagine that that comes to devastate the continent, literally devastates the continent. And then it's only because of that and the collapse of the economy that actually Europe after slavery is then able to go and colonize, because it couldn't colonize before. Right. Slavery is a thing which destroys Africa enough so that you can have colonialism at all.
You can actually do it.
There is no colonialism, right? And then so this is where the best book for this is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. And then so when the Europeans take over, so Britain takes over Nigeria, it's already mashed up Nigeria because of slavery, etc. is already really devastated Nigeria anyway. Then takes over formally, and the colonies, everything in the colony is to service Britain, everything. So the land's owned by British companies, the resources are owned by British companies, roads are built to the sea. There's no schools, there's no schools aren't built, hospitals aren't built, there's no education. So you imagine at the point where you have independence in Nigeria, of course it's not going to work. Like, how could it possibly work? Like, there's no infrastructure, there's no money, and the resources are still owned by Western companies. So, and then you say, well, go and have independence. Well, that's going to fail, isn't it?
And this is exactly this is why I got so excited by your analogy. I'm like an analogy girl. I do love an analogy. It just resonates with the soul when you get the right one. And your one in the book hit the nail on the head, because as far as I was concerned, all of these countries have just been left, destroyed after the brutality that all of these random people from Europe have inflicted on us, and I say us as Black and brown people. And the next minute, they disperse, they go back to their homeland, but the next minute they say, hey, Jamaica, hey, Africa, I'm going to give you a loan because you have no money. I've got your back. And that's what I meant. That's what I meant by the analogy. So to this day, it's so confusing. And I know that these countries have debt to Britain, but to read something like that and to read the things in your book, it just put everything into context in terms of, okay, that's why all these countries are in debt, because no one actually said, we're going to look after you, even though we're going to look after you after we savagely basically raped your countries. No, we're going to rape your country, go home, and then give you a loan when you need help. And then people wonder why Africa looks the way that it does. People wonder why England looks the way that it does. And that's why I bring it back to white supremacy. And that was the golden thread throughout the book that I got. And that's why I wanted you to explain what white supremacy was and how it fit into the slavery, the genocide, the slavery, the colonialism, and then this kind of new, as you say in chapter 5, dawn of a new age, right? And I saw that as that transition of the overt racism, the genocide, the slavery, etc., to covert, right? Because you have to transition. So I'll ask this, which is, like I said, UN, IMF, World Bank. So now that we've talked about the stealing, let's just put it into kind of historical context. We've given a great analogy about stealing. Let's show people how it works in terms of globally what we mean by this analogy and why it resonates to you.
Yeah, so after that, so the kind of over ends because it can't really last anymore, and then European empires are fighting each other. I mean, in fact, First World War is a colonial war. Like, it does this. This is these empires coming together and fighting against each other. And the Second World War happens because of the First World War. So we actually don't understand these wars without colonialism, because that's actually what's part of it, right? And they kind of come to the realization, this can't carry on. Like, European nation state led isn't going to work. And also, remember, we fought in all these wars, right? Like, when I go on TV and someone says, you should be grateful because my grandfather fought in the war. All my grandparents fought in the war. Like, we were all part of it. Like, it was a world war. We were colonial subjects. So we all fought in the war. So you've got people in the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, who've been fighting in wars. They're saying, now we want nationalism. we're not going back to that, right? So they kind of have to stop, and they have to transition. And actually, in one of these Malcolm speeches I was listening to, he has this analogy where he says, what happens is that Europeans pass the ball basically to America. and America becomes the center, and America comes as a friend, right? As the humanitarian colonialism, where it's, no, we're not going to do violence, but we'll set up these agencies, the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, which most of them are based in the United States. And these will be the ways that we support the world and development and trade and all this stuff. But it's a rigged game from the very, 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 very beginning. And so what happens, you get your independence in countries, right? Countries that we've just, because it can't possibly sustain themselves, because their economies are still today, their economies. Who owns the cocoa in Ghana? Ain't Ghanaian people, it's Cadbury's, right? Like it's Swiss companies. Like even now it hasn't changed. And so when the countries inevitably come and say we need help, we need support from places like IMF and the World Bank, they give them the support, but one, it's a loan with crazy conditions. I mean, Jamaica's interest debt repayments are higher than anything else they paid for, like higher than education spending, right? And also,
but no one got reparations. No one got reparations, right? No one got reparations. But yet there's a loan with interest.
There's no reparations. I mean, Jamaica's even like, we're only even there because it's like we shouldn't even be there. Like my dad shouldn't live in Jamaica. I shouldn't be Jamaican. That shouldn't make any sense. It's only slavery the reason that we're there. Britain clearly owes us the debt, but in fact we're somehow now in debt to Britain. And it's not just that they get loans and that you have to pay them back, but then the strings attached to those loans make everything worse. So you have to invite more private financing. You have to liberalize your economy.
Privatization.
You have to privatize. You have to have austerity. In fact, everything that we're currently complaining about there, that was already been done in Africa and Asia and everywhere else. They did that. They ransacked their economy a long time. And so the important thing is for this transition, without the violence, you can't have this transition. It's the violence that devastates, impoverishes, creates the conditions where you can then say, well, actually, let's transition into this kind of benevolent covert racism. So they're very much connected because you can't have one without the other, right?
I love what you've just said because I want to bring it onto something that obviously has been burning on every single person's mind. George Floyd's murder verdict, right? Because that to me actually kind of connects with what you've just said, because it's taken something overt where a Black man is killed, murdered in front of our eyes for us to be like, oh my gosh, we need to sort out this Black equality in 2020. That's literally what happened, right? Because we saw Overt. And then what this has done is now there is a verdict, absolutely amazing, and he's going to jail, absolutely great, but that's a whole nother conversation. What I've realized is that literally symbolizes everything that you just said. Down to a T, which is that something overt happens and then we all kind of kick in and then that's when we make a shift. But the covert doesn't seem to work. It's only when it's overt. Hence why we have George Floyd, we have a great verdict, but that is a perfect example, perfect analogy or event that I can use to describe what you just said.
And this is part of the problem with how we respond to racism, is that we still really respond to the overt. When it's the covert, we just don't. Like, for example, I mean, there's been some about this now, but like Black women are 4.5 times more likely to die in childbirth. Like, that's really that should be something we should be on the streets about, because it's not as overt video in your face. We just kind of know about it, but we're not protesting about it. And so that should be a lesson to us to think about. Actually, how do we respond differently? Because we shouldn't just respond to the overt. We should be always responding, because you can find examples of that constantly.
Exactly, and I think that's been my biggest issue is realizing during this path from last year till now that we have an extremely poor understanding. Like I said at the beginning, homogeneous box, racism is just racism, and it looks over and that's it. And so the UK is basically stagnant because we are covert. We are covertly racist in regards to how our racism manifests. And it's only a small cohort of people within, in my humble opinion, within Britain that exhibit overt forms of racism, but the average person is covert, and it's that covert that fuels institutionalized. But those two things, highly insidious, highly covert, highly discreet, no one talks about them, no one reacts to them because it's discreet. And it's only if someone is murdered in your face where you'll be like, right, gotta do something, can be a good person. And I think that has always been a part of our issue. I think it's also a way of the system maintaining itself in a weird way. Does that make any sense? It's like almost the way that it kind of utilizes the fact that that we only respond to overt. And so as long as you stay under the radar, kind of good. I don't want to sound like I'm talking conspiracy here, but you get my drift, right?
But no, but
You get my drift.
not to come back to Malcolm again, because I always go to Malcolm. But anyway, Malcolm, like listen to the 17 hours of Malcolm's great. But Malcolm like warns about this, but he says, look, it's the difference between the wolf and the fox. Like we always focus on the wolf. Right?
Yeah.
Bears their teeth in the ground. You know they're racist. Donald Trump's racist. Look, obviously we know that's the wolf. But actually the fox is worse because the fox bears their teeth in a smile. Says you're your friend, that liberal, we're all getting on together, etc., etc., etc. But it's still the same. Like, black people run away from the wolf in the south, end up in ghettos in the north, getting killed by police. It's still the same. It's just we somehow think it's better because it's got a friendlier face to it. And unfortunately, I think that's still largely the case. If I'm honest, that's probably still largely the case. No,
I totally agree. As in, is it really progress? My analogy, I thought of your analogy and just came up with mine, and I'll speed this up because I've got so many more questions, but I didn't anticipate just enjoying sitting here talking. But yeah, this is what happens. But I'll just give you my quick analogy and I'll move to my next question. My analogy for where we are now is it actually progress, overt to covert, right? So in society, we're dealing with overt transitioning to covert. And then on a global scale, which is what your book is about, overt transitioning to covert, is that actually progress? Because for me, the analogy that I could think of was it was the equivalent of someone robbing me in broad daylight at gunpoint. Okay, that's one version. Or they sneak into my house while I'm sleeping. Which one's worse? Someone sneaks into your house while you are sleeping. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they look like. You don't know where they're going. You're never going to find them again. And no one's going to believe you because there were no cameras. Or
I never know you've been robbed.
Someone robs you in broad daylight. It's that, right? It's that. Which one is that's worse? Which one's worse?
And you might not even know you've been robbed. I remember there was these people that were good. If you left your key in your door, they'd be able to open your door from the outside, and they'd just go in and like take £10, so you wouldn't know. And then for years, and no one knew. They would just get away with it because no one knew. And that's what's happening. In fact, innocently, like if we actually think of it, it's gonna sound, maybe this isn't the time to say it, but I would just say it anyway. Like if you think about the covert is way worse because we don't struggle against it because we don't know it's there.
I agree.
And finally, like that's what one of these things with this verdict today. Look, I'm happy. Look, don't get me wrong. I don't want to. I'm happy the verdict was. He should be in prison. Don't get twisted. But if the verdict had been the other way, and you got that they just can't stand black people, we would be back on the streets. We protested. We like.
It's inevitable.
And actually, that's what we need. That's what we need, though, right?
The outcome. Yeah.
But actually, if the verdict had been the other way, that overt racism, we actually got the reaction that we need. And now, because it was not that way, we haven't got the reaction that we need. So in some ways, the overt is better. And if you look at the responses to Trump, etc., it's because you could see it and it was so clear. And you need that sometimes to spark us into action. And we shouldn't, because we should just be in action mode all the time. But unfortunately, we need someone. We still need someone with a hood on or calling us the N-word to get excited, right? To get in the streets, and that's a problem for us.
And this is what I was trying to say about, and I said it briefly, and I don't know if it was a part of my tangent, but I was saying about the reason why not only is covert racism such a problem, obviously because it's so insidious. Please tell me about the time. I'm going to say this really quickly, but because I found that, like I said, it finds ways to defend itself. It kind of recalibrates itself in order to defend itself, and so it will use whatever it has. So it will use the fact that the world will probably be outraged if Derek goes free. So if he doesn't go free, then we'll be able to keep everything under the surface. Now that sounds really kind of out there, but if you really think about it logically, just in terms of human beings and how people are and how we think as human beings, it actually makes perfect sense. It actually is the exact same thing that you said, which is what we really needed in order to kind of really push everything forward. If we as a society and as people react to overt, then what we needed was a reaction that went against that. But in actual fact, we've got something that allowed us to feel like, take the gas taking your foot off the pedal, right?
Okay.
And that, for me, is a part of the defense mechanism. Does that make any sense? That is actually a part of the system's defense mechanism. And that brings me on to capitalism and benefiting off of capitalism and the system using that to defend itself. Hence why that is my next question. So I have no idea how much time we've got left, and I had so many more questions. This is what happens. I want to jump straight into it. Anti-capitalism. How do you feel about it? Are you an anti-capitalist? Is capitalism the reason why Black people are dealing with racism on this planet? Tell us real quick, and then I'll see how much time we've got left.
Yeah, look, capitalism is racism. I want to just point that out. Like, if you actually look at the capitalism we have, you could be able to theorize a capitalism that wasn't racism, but the capitalism we have is just racism. Like, it's founded upon racism. It runs on racism. There was a reason that when they say offshored, like, we offshore stuff. We're saying the poor Black and brown people. That's offshored. Like, it really, like, the way the world works today, it can't be separated from its economic system. And you're 100% right that this is a very, like, the way this move into the new age of empire is the best thing they could do, right? One of the ways in which, so 50 years ago, it wasn't clear that the West was going to win. It was not clear that capitalism was going to survive. It really wasn't. That there was communism, there was Pan-Africanism, there was lots of movements, and there were two responses. One of them was violence, because the system likes to kill people. But the other one, the more insidious one, was race relations. It's not a coincidence that we get race relations in the 60s. We get like equality legislation, you get independence in countries all at the same time, right? Because one of the things they do is say, well, look, we'll let a few of you in, right? We'll let, like, I can be a professor, you get some money, you're kind of in it, you're not really in it, you're second-class citizens in it, but you're kind of in it. You're better off here than you are in the Caribbean, or better off here than you are in Nigeria, right? And that level of access and comfort was done so that we'd feel better and we stop protesting. And for the last 40 years, that's probably what it has done, right? And so that's what we've got to guard against, is the system will always give concessions so that we don't burn everything down, right? So,
exactly. But it finds a way to recalibrate itself, to defend itself. I thought after your beautiful analogy in the book, I just started running with analogies as I kept on reading. And the other one that I came up with was Star Wars. I don't know why I thought Star Wars. I thought Star Wars. And I thought of, the typical scenario where the mothership, you got to destroy the mothership. And so the army comes in and they do this full frontal attack, and it never works because the mothership has got this force field that just kicks in, right? And that's how I see the system. It will find ways to defend itself. And I resonate, and I'll just say this really quickly, that the fact that your book kind of really honed in on the point that the damage has already been done. It's not about doing overt anymore. We don't need to do any overt. The damage has already been done. Now it's about the system maintaining itself, sustaining itself, defending itself. I think of the police crime and sentencing bill recently, where you cannot protest. You get £2,500 if you protest, if you use a megaphone, etc. It resonated with me, of course. If that goes through by next year, then it means that you go to jail if you are noisy or cause an annoyance on the road. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about women's rights or animals or Black people. If you just cause an annoyance, you're going to jail, okay? So that is a perfect example for me of recalibrating itself, defending itself. You see thousands of Black and white people marching about Black equality. So it has to defend itself. And so instead it ends up trying to implement a whole new law that stops you from doing the very thing that they were offended by. And so that's why I like what you said, because it is, everything you talk about in your book is on a global scale. And what we deal with right now is just on a scale in terms of society. And it's so nice to be able to see that bridge between what society, what I talk about when I'm on the news or whatever about institutionalized racism, covert racism, and overt racism, how that connects to ultimately the argument that an abolitionist would refer to in regards to the bigger picture, white supremacy and racism. So I actually feel they connect. There's no difference here. There's very much.
I guess the difference is. I guess the difference is the solution. The solution is probably the difference, right? Like, what do you do about it? Is probably the
That's it. All right, so that's the final question. I don't know how long have we got. What time is it?
I think there's a couple of questions in the box as well. I think there's a couple of Q&A questions.
Yeah, let's see if anyone asks about the abolition stuff, because that was the last one. Let me see. I'm sorry if I'm an old lady and I don't answer this. Okay. Okay, so hi Rio. So in terms of dismantling structural racism in global organizations like the UN and national institutions such as Netflix, in what ways can this be done? Yes, that is my question. Thank you, Rio. What policies have been enacted thus far to improve this situation? And more widely, can these institutions genuinely be reconstructed to promote true racial equality, or do we need total new organizations? Ria, I very much like you, sir. Whoever you are, you're great. That was my question. Thank you, Kehinde. Take it away.
I guess we'll differ here on this one, but like they got like the purpose of the UN, the purpose of the police, but is to maintain white supremacy. That's what they do. That's what they were made to do. Like they're not going to do something else. And actually, if you look at a lot of the reforms, they actually just make things worse in the long run. Like they don't actually help. Like like for instance, after McPherson report, like this is when I said this the other day, someone got really upset. But I actually prefer the Sewell report to the McPherson report. Not because it's good.
One's over and one's over. It's very simple.
Exactly.
One's over.
It's in your face, right?
It's very simple. Turning to Wolf, went with over, like this, and went with over. And it's the same as, what did you say, the wolf and the fox? I love that analogy. It's the wolf or the silver fox, right? It's both are bad, but it's just about which one do you prefer, the grinning, the big teeth, or the I'm going to smile at you and then rip your you throw it out of your chest.
I'm taking the wolf.
Like, you know that.
Because no, McPherson's dead. Like if you actually look at what happens after McPherson, in fact, that report, the Sewell report, you could trace a direct line to McPherson. Like really, like McPherson defines institutional racism in a way that actually isn't institutional racism. It's just prejudice.
Yeah,
it really doesn't do anything bad. It gives you a framework which doesn't address racism at all and gives you no tools whatsoever to actually fight. And actually,
just the phrase.
It's worse. I actually had a case. Because of lots of reasons, I can't go into lots of detail. But at work, I rose an issue which is clearly racist, like obviously racist. But the framework that we have to deal with it says, "Oh, it's not racist." And then so I go through that process, and they say, "Well, look, now this says it's not racist, so we're not racist." So now they've actually got ammunition to say it's not racist, even though any sensible person looking at it will go, "That's clearly racist," right? So if you actually look at the actual reforms, make things worse, not better. So I have to say, I think you have to get rid of them, and get rid of them and then create new ones. Not just get rid of them, have nothing. Okay. But I think you have to get rid of them, have new institutions, new organizations. And actually, interestingly, Malcolm there's one area where I disagree strongly with Malcolm X is the UN, because Malcolm at the start of the UN. A lot of people had faith in the UN because it's one member, one vote in the General Assembly. There's more black and brown countries than there are Western countries. And if that's how it actually ran, with a majority vote on all the major issues, it would be a good organization, right? Well, maybe, but a better organization. But actually, how it actually works is the Security Council, which is America, Britain, France, Russia, China, make all the decisions. And that's the problem. The real power in the UN isn't there. So I guess if you reform the UN to take away the Security Council and made it a global organization, then that wouldn't be the UN. That wouldn't be the UN. Not the purpose of the UN.
It'd be something completely different. And the institution, like you said.
That would be radical, right? So that would be revolutionary. So no, I don't think you can reform these. I think you need to get rid of them and create new, different organizations that can do things different.
Okay, so then the question I have to ask before, apologies, I don't know if I know that there are more, but I'm hoping that I'll touch on whatever anyone is thinking currently. Which is, again, I'm reform, you're abolition. I believe in reforming the system, you believing in abolishing it, but obviously you benefit from the system. You have a book, you are a professor, all of these things, right? Just like a normal human being, the same thing that we complain about, we technically benefit from. So even for me as a Black activist who talks about institutionalized racism, on a global scale, the world is institutionally racist in regards to Africa. And yet I benefit from that because I have a phone that has a mineral called cobalt in it, and cobalt is mined by Black little kids in Congo. So the kind of thing that I'm grasping at is, if I believe in trying to change the system, even though I agree with you that the system is never built for us and it isn't for us, so therefore that's tricky in of itself. But how do you then sell the argument of abolition when you benefit? You have a paycheck right now, you work at university, you have a book. How do you then say, I'm going to abolish the same thing that allows you to eat, sleep, breathe, have a woman, go on a date? Yeah, you know, do you? You need money, Kehinde.
But this is. I mean, I said, and it's that incorporation of us into the system, which is the reason why you're not going to get revolutionary politics here. Like, if you just rely on me and people like me to have revolution, it's never going to happen, because I'm better than most. I'm in the top 4% of earners in the whole entire world. I don't even earn that much money. It just tells you how little people make in the rest of the world. Like, anybody in the UK, even the poorest person in the UK, is in the top 80% of earners. Most people in the world don't have an indoor toilet. Like, it's insane when you actually compare them.
I know, you don't even think about that.
It's insane, right?
Yeah.
So definitely, I'm making an argument which would definitely lose my standard of living 100%. But that's why you should believe me, right? I'm making an argument which is going to cost me. It's not, I don't benefit from this at all. I'm losing out. So surely you should have faith in me now. I say, take my money away from me.
It's true. You have plenty of things to lose, and yet you're still here pushing this argument. So I think that says a lot of who you are as a person. For me, that was hence why I was excited to speak.
But I think the thing is, I think the way to reframe that would be, what is that? And I do this more in Back to Black, more than this book is. Look, individually, I can be happy about this, but I understand that a child dies every 10 seconds because of the wealth that I have. I understand that the kids that make this conversation possible, I know this smartphone, laptop and all that, their kids are dying, and those kids, they look like my kids, right? That's a real thing. So I actually can't be satisfied and content when I know that my wealth is from dead kids. Like, I can't. It makes me, I can't sleep at night. It's just that I may have money, but I'm not happy. And we should think about the collective more and don't think about the individual. And that's really the argument, right? It's not about my individual wealth, it's about collectively. And as long as that's the condition of the collective, then I can't be satisfied. Or shouldn't be satisfied. Right?
So then it's about kind of adopting that nature, doing what you can within your own society. And then, because ultimately what we're saying is the England, because we're so engrossed in the problem and because we benefit so much from the problem, as you said, 80%, we're doing extremely well in comparison to the rest of the world. It's far harder for us to turn around and say we're going to try to really break down the system because, like I said, in terms of the reformist argument, we benefit from the said system that we complain about. So then it kind of goes back to reform, but I'm not going to hog the space. I'm going to ask another, I'll write down another question because that's not nice if I keep asking questions. So I'm sure there's more. Let me check. Kehinde, you might have to help me if I'm not good at this. Okay, that was one. Okay. Kehinde, any ideas on how African countries can liberate themselves from neocolonialism, perhaps with reference to Nigeria?
So I think this goes to the solution. What is a solution? And the solution isn't in one country. I think this is the big thing when you think about like Nigeria is a creation of Britain. It's not like, why do we think this is a real thing? Like, literally the border is not. It's a made up border, and all the countries on the African continent are totally made up, right, by Europeans. And the only way you're going to have any kind of solution in Africa is when Africa comes together as Africa. Now, Africa is actually the richest continent on the planet by a distance still, right? And this is one of the things I try and do in this book is to say, look, the thing that's been missing for us generally, Africa in particular, is Black consciousness, right? Like, if we actually had Black consciousness in Africa, slavery can't happen. It's because we don't see ourselves as people, like we see ourselves as different, and therefore we don't come together. And even now, it's kind of the same thing. And if you're looking for a solution that's a Nigerian solution or a Ghanaian solution or it's a dead end, can't work, right? The only solution is when you have real continental unity, and then you have the power to push back. Because the biggest trick that the Europeans tell you is that Britain could have done this by itself, or France could have done it by itself, or America could never be anywhere without everywhere else. As much as they fought each other, there's been collusion on the basic premise of, like, we're going to take stuff from Africa and we're going to divide it up. We're going to take stuff from Asia, we're going to divide it up. So Europe, that's the one thing you can say about Europeans. That really, that's the thing that white supremacy, it's whiteness becomes this thing we say, unify around and have used to control them. And we haven't responded in the way that we should have responded, which is to organize and Black consciousness and to be a collective. Once we do that, that's when you start talking about real change.
So it's ultimately about unity, nothing less. Basically, without the unity, it's just not going to happen, even in the slightest.
No, which is why a lot of the which is why like when you had like 62 and the founding of the Organization of African Unity is the kind of key moment in Africa where you have this. There are people saying, look, African unity, let's get rid of the West, let's all come together, economy, etc. And that loses out to countries saying, no, I want my country, you have your country, etc. And the Organization of African Unity, which is the forerunner to the UN, basically enshrines the nation state borders. And as soon as that's done, it's finished. And we may as well not bother, because as soon as you've allowed those containers to exist, you've already lost. That's a very Western game to start playing.
Yeah. Damage is already done, basically. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. What have we got? To both speakers, how do you find the energy to persist in challenging the white supremacist structures in this country in the face of constant, unstinting opposition? And what advice would you give to people wishing to become more actively anti-racist? Okay, so how do you find the energy to persist in challenging the white supremacist structures?
Do you have a choice? I don't know. There's no choice, right? You just have to. Like, I don't know. Like, that's just. No, I think no. Actually, no. Once you understand the scale of it and the stakes of it, and like I said, kids are dying because of this. And like, once we understand that racism is a matter of life and death, you ain't got a choice. And as you put it, I'm very privileged, so I ain't got no excuse. Literally, I don't have no excuse. And for me to be doing something else with my time, I don't even know what that looks like. Honestly, I don't even know what that looks like, to be fair. I don't know.
No, I totally agree with you. I literally just probably says the exact same thing as you. It's about when you understand, because ultimately it comes down to empathy, right? So if you don't have full empathy, you're not really going to kind of kick yourself up the butt and kind of be active. But if you have the empathy, it's extremely easy, as in it's just like breathing. It's nothing, right? But you have to have the understanding. In order to get the understanding, you have to understand what's happening right now in society, all forms of racism, how they manifest, overt, institutionalized, and then how they manifest on a global level, which is what this book is about. So when you understand the two, it's easy. It's tiring, yeah, but it's easy. It isn't a chore. It's quite normal, right? So yeah, I agree with you. Okay, what was this one? So I'm Welsh. Hi, Richard. I've been saying hello to people. Hi, Richard. So I'm Welsh with Scottish family. How much can you break up of the UK help countries like Wales and Scotland, as well as England regions to address their colonialist history in a positive way? And how can you make that a fundamental part of creating these new states? Does that make sense to you, Kehinde?
I mean, it's interesting because if you actually look at where, like, actually it's interesting because now you've got like Wales. I think Wales have committed to saying they want to look at slavery and colonialism in the Welsh curriculum. I think the Scottish National Party has said something similar, and it really is England. Like, England is the one. Like, the English Parliament is the one who's really stressing we're not going to do any of these things. And I think that's what the question is getting at, is actually in the, once you come away from the English Parliament, which is terrible, and Boris Johnson is terrible and all that's terrible, and maybe there's a bit more progressive in Scotland and Wales. It's actually funny though, because Scotland and Wales have typically done the opposite, right? Like, I've seen themselves in this, I've seen themselves as somehow as colonial victims because England has colonized England and Wales. But I mean, come on, man, let's stop the nonsense. Like, Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. Once they joined the Union, were very, very, very much part of this colonial project. Like, my name's Andrews. That ain't an English name, right? It's a Scottish name. There's is it South America? There's some place in colony in I think it's Latin America where they just speak Welsh, because like there was so Welsh colonialism was such a big thing. So I think it's definitely a possibility if you think about what is happening in the devolved parliament. But I don't think it's necessarily guaranteed, because sometimes there's a distancing as well in that move, that we're all in the same boat when we're really, really, really not in the same boat. But possibly, and I think it's been positive, the moves in Wales and Scotland on that regard, at least, I guess.
And I have to mention that I read an article recently about Wales, and they've actually made Black history mandatory within their history or in their education system. And that's obviously something that the UK hasn't done. So that's just something to bear in mind. I think there are 59 modules in regards to history, and only 12 of them, as far as I'm aware, actually talk about Black history or the involvement of Black people in the UK in the development of Britain. Only 12 out of 59, whereas Wales, mandatory, okay? Mandatory, made it mandatory. So just thought I'd throw that out there. Found that quite interesting. Okay, what was the next one? Imarn, in your question, you often refer back to your worldview as a Black woman. To what extent do you find identity politics a useful tool for these conversations? Well, it's almost like saying I don't have an argument without it. It's that simple. I don't have an argument without it. I'm not anything other than a Black woman living in South East London. So all of my perspectives come from being Black, from my granny, from my mum, from growing up. So it's the same equivalent as someone saying, I don't see colour. Well, if you don't see colour, you don't see my experiences, you don't see my granny, you don't see my mum, you don't see the things that we go through, overt, covert, and institutionalised. So I think it is important to kind of express how you feel, and also kind of make sure that you are true to who you are as a Black woman in England. And I think that those two things come together because of obviously what I'm talking about in terms of race and politics and Black equality. I don't think you can separate the two. I find it really difficult, to be honest with you. I don't know how people do that. So yes. I've no idea what time we have left. I'm not good at timing, I can't lie. I don't want to make a joke about being Black and being late, but you get my point.
It's true though, of course.
But you get the point, right? I think we probably run over time, but let's see. As a Black woman, hi Dee, as a Black woman, that is how all systems interact with me as a Black woman. Yes, that wasn't a question, but I totally agree. I think we're good with questions now. Have we run over time? I don't know what time. Is it 8:30?
No, I think we've got 8 minutes technically left.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so I wanted to just ask you really, really quickly, what were your thoughts on two things? Black Lives Matter in the US and in the UK, and then obviously where we are currently right now after the race report, after the trial, after COVID, after knowing that Black people are disproportionately stopped and searched 9 times more than white people, after all of this information, how do you feel about where we are right now and where we're heading? That's what I really wanted to know.
Well, I think in both the US and the UK, Black Lives Matter has raised awareness. There's been a big raising of awareness of the issues, put the issues on the agenda, which is important. I mean, I think there's definitely criticisms in the States you can make about Black Lives Matter in terms of the direction, and look, as a radical, it's a new civil rights movement in the States. So that's not, it's going to sound like a criticism coming from me, but it's really not a criticism. Civil rights movement is very successful. But is it putting forward the change that we need? I'm not sure. And in the UK, quite to make a similar critique as well. But in terms of raising awareness and getting people vocal and then changing the conversation, you've got to say they've both done that, right? Which is a powerful thing. Where we go next is a whole other question, I think, which does tie into, after the race report. I mean, I think I've been saying this a lot today, actually. The UK is worse now in terms of racial relations than it was before the summer. Like, we've gone backwards. Like, we have definitely gone backwards.
But that's why I said I keep on bringing it back, and I hope that it resonates with anyone that is listening. The same system that we talk about, capitalism, white supremacy, and racism, it defends itself. It finds ways to recalibrate and protect itself. And so the irony is, after thousands of people marching last year, we are far worse right now than we were last year. And imagine how I feel as one of the people that was leading several protests. I shouldn't laugh, but imagine how I feel right now. Could you imagine how I felt when I saw the police crime and sentencing bill? Are you kidding me? That didn't come into existence before Black Lives Matter and Extinction Rebellion, but loads of people decide to stand up for their rights, and next minute, there's big pushback. Not just a little pushback, huge pushback. And
the backlash,
that's what I find with society. This isn't new. I'd be kind of arrogant if I sat here and said that this generation has experienced new. No, it's part of the system. It defends itself. It will always find ways to protect itself, whether it is the Kehindes that preach what they preach but still benefit from capitalism, whether it's the Imarns that preach what she preaches but still benefits from capitalism. Do you know what I mean? It finds ways. And so it's just about being knowledgeable. So I like what you said about Black Lives Matter. I think the sole purpose was to build that awareness and get it out there, because it starts with knowledge. You can't really do much past that if you don't have the knowledge, if you don't know how racism manifests itself within your current society and across the globe.
But I think what I'd say is, on a more positive note, like certainly in terms of the state is worse, but I think in terms of our understanding, it's much better. And I think that one of the things, and this is interesting because even the way you talk about reform, it sounds more like revolution. I think you're talking about revolution before reform, right? Like,
because I can put myself in a box. Everyone's like, oh, well, you're reforms, you can't be an abolition. No, some random person told you that you're either one or the other. Don't put myself in a box. I believe in everything that you said, hence why the irony is everyone knows me to be reformed, but yeah, I'm talking, Kehinde, get Kehinde's book. No, that's me. And everyone knows it. And people find me confusing because I talk about an abolitionist, but everything that you say is accurate. So there's no disputing it. There's no if, buts, or maybes. It's just about finding how your argument connects with mine. That's it. That's all that I'm here for. So yeah, that's why that book, it did a lot for me.
Radical reform. There we go. We need radical reform. We come to agreement.
Do I have to quote you though? So if I say that on like BBC News, I've got to be like, right, Kehinde. So
you have it. That's yours. That's yours. You have that one. Radical reform. Yeah, that's yours. There you go. Unity is key, right?
That'll be my slogan. Unity is key. Radical reformers. Imarn Ayton to mayor next year. That would be me. A bit of Kehinde, a bit of Imarn, a bit of whoever. Yeah.
But I think the lesson of history is generally that you don't get. Oftentimes, like the worst, people always ask me, "What's the solution? What's the solution?" I can give you the broad strokes, but the truth is, until you're doing it, until we're working together and building it, that's when you know what the solution is. And I guarantee you, we're going to come to a position where it's like, yeah, this is what that makes sense. This is where we need to go once we agree with the basic premise of it. And we do too much get that. It's this label, that label. That's not the point. Let's just start doing the work, and then we'll build the kind of world we need to build effectively.
So you do believe that we will get to that point where, in terms of now just talking about the Black community, that we will kind of unify and start to see the kind of path that we can all go down, as opposed to still being kind of split?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Tony Sewell can't come, but like, most of us.
I know, right? I know. And who was it? Mercy. I say, I'm not even going to be a
Kelly Baddock, she can stay where she is.
Many people that are not.
But
let's just be honest.
Generally, though, we're passive that when we come together and start to, and this is because when you start, and this is why it's so important to think globally. Because if we're saying, well, how do you stop those children dying? We have to have big answers for that. There can't be like a reform, like a legislation in the UK. There has to be a much bigger answer. We'll start asking those questions collectively, then we'll come to an answer that can change things, right?
And so the final thing I will say is your book helped connect small-scale racism to big-scale racism. That is what your book is about for me. Obviously, there's other people that will get different things from it, but The New Age of Empire was about connecting that bridge, being able to see it as Imarn in England, what it looks like in our society, and then connecting the dots on a global level. Hence why, this has been perfect. Thank you, Kehinde. I don't know if we've run out of time. We probably have.
Oh, perfectly on time.
You're a talker as well, so it's not just me. I'm not even going to hold this weight and say it's just me. Yes, the British handpicked their own Indigenous leaders in the colonies. I didn't see it. Oh, thank you both for your work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, pleasure. Kehinde, this has been perfect. I'm hoping to be able to speak to you again. Obviously, we've got the anniversary coming up. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's nice to speak to you the first time. So
I know, right?
Yeah.
This is what I needed. Exactly what I needed. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in as well. I hope I wasn't too chatty. I am a chatter and I've been dying to speak to Kehinde, so that happens. You try to get in all your questions and it just doesn't work out that way.
But I think it worked. It worked great. So no, thank you. Thanks a lot for your time as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Amazing. Right. So should we sign out?
Yeah, I think so. All right.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys. Thanks,
No worries.
Housmans.
Thanks, then.
Thanks, Kehinde.
Bye.
Bye.